YouTubers around the world, around the country, around the Ozark Plateau. We're on chapter 2 of book 2 of the Spirit Flyer series, and the title of this book is The Toy Campaign. I feel like I'm going to sneeze. I thought I had this fixed. It didn't. Oh, come on. Come on. Try to get it without falling off. Okay. That cable is a USB charging cable from a Makita battery pack with a belt clip on it, power source hookup to my tablet. Okay. Through the Black Window, Chapter 2. The trip downtown seemed longer than usual to Susan because she kept wondering if she was doing the right thing. Centerville was built around a town square. Main Street ran into the square on the south end and continued out the north end. All the numbered streets ran east and west, while the street, which was named like Elm and Maple and Oak and Pine, add a few more there, ran north and south like Main Street. Most of the businesses in town faced the square or were on Main Street. A small shopping center was being built just outside of town near the 4-lane highway, but it hadn't opened yet. Most of the gas stations and restaurants were out by the highway too. Small town America. The county courthouse, the biggest building in town, was located in the center of the square. The rest of the square was like a park, with grass and trees and bushes and lots of old wooden rail benches. An ancient wooden bandstand stood near the courthouse on the southeast corner. Through the years, a lot of the townspeople in Centerville had wanted to tear down the old bandstand, saying it was outdated and dangerous, yet more people wanted it to stay. Even so, there was usually only one short band concert a year, which took place on the 4th of July. Susan liked the old bandstand because she often read library books there under the shade of the gazebo-style roof. As Susan rode past it, she suddenly wished she was reading a good book instead of going on John's snooping mission. Thinking of reading made Susan think of her new glasses, which she had left at home on purpose. She squinted as she rode because she was slightly nearsighted. Though Susan had simple good looks, with her brown hair and brown eyes, she thought that her glasses made her look too serious. John had called her super serious and sensible Susan, the day she'd come back from the optometrist's office. Although her parents had made John stop calling her that, Susan secretly worried that her glasses did make her appear too solemn. Super serious and sensible Susan. Solemn, sensible Susan. Susan was slightly taller than John and quite strong. She had come in third in the softball throw the last 2 years in her class over all the boys and girls. Oh. She was also a fairly fast runner at long distances. John was a good athlete also. He was especially good at sprinting, like the 50-yard and 100-yard dash. John had straight, sandy blonde hair and deep green eyes. Even though John was a cousin, there was a strong Kramer resemblance between Susan and John, since his father had looked a lot like Susan's father. Susan thought her father was handsome, though his nose was just a little bit long. Even that, she thought, gave him a strong face. As a sheriff for Centerville, she thought he needed a strong face. Well, yeah. As a sheriff for the town of Centerville, she thought he needed a strong face. The toy store was located on the first block south of the square on Main Street. A shoe store, hardware store, and a beauty parlor were on the same side of the block. The two children rode past the front of the toy store 3 times. The sign was still in the window, and the black curtain still hid everything from sight. John pedaled around the block to the alley with Susan close behind. John looked behind them, then rode down the alley. Susan sighed, then reluctantly followed her cousin. He stopped when he reached the big garbage container behind the toy store. Bin. He stopped when he reached the big garbage container behind the toy store. The garbage bin was a huge metal box on wheels. The little window he wanted to spy in was directly above the trash can. 6 black bars guarded the glass. "I'll climb up on the garbage bin," John said. If I stand on the edge, I can reach the window, pull myself up, and look inside. I think this whole idea is crazy, Susan said. I mean, what do you expect to see? I'm not sure, John said. If I don't see anything, maybe there will be something in the garbage. You can tell a lot about a person by their trash. Detectives look at trash all the time. I have a bad feeling about this whole scheme, Susan said, looking behind her down the alley. She rocked back and forth on her bicycle. That's when she heard a horn blow. It lasted 2 seconds, then stopped. Who's blowing a horn? Susan asked, looking around. I didn't hear a horn, John said. He stopped and listened. Then Susan heard the horn blast again. The sound wasn't loud, yet it didn't really seem far away. She had never heard a horn quite like it before. You know it's happening, right? Of course. You heard it that time, didn't you? Susan said. You must be hearing things. How could you not hear it? It sounded like it was right here. John wasn't listening. He looked at the trash bin and got off his Spirit Flyer. If this whole thing has something to do with Spirit Flyers or the deeper world, maybe you shouldn't get off your bike, Susan said. Then how could I look in the window, John said. Make the Spirit Flyer go up. Fly. Susan was about to tell him how, but John was already on top of the edge of the trash bin. He leaned against the brick of the store and sidestepped closer to the window. John paused to look down into the trash bin to see what was inside. The boy frowned. A large dark object that looked something like a window rested on the top of the rest of the trash. If this was no ordinary window, if it was a window at all, a black frame about 3 feet wide and 4 feet long held a single pane of something hard and shiny that looked like black glass. Maybe it's plastic, John mumbled, but who could see through that? What's plastic? John ignored his cousin's question. The boy began to feel afraid. Something about the black window seemed vaguely familiar. He leaned over and looked closer. Suddenly the blackness quivered like water on the surface of a pond. John could almost see through the darkness, as if looking through deep, shadowy water. As he looked deeper, a blurry image began to appear as if rising up out of the darkness. Then the image finally came to the surface. John gasped as he saw his own reflection staring back at him. But this was a different kind of reflection. The person in the black window had a dark chain wrapped around his neck. The ends of the chain seemed to be coming right up out of the glass toward John. As the hands in the reflection moved up and touched the chain, John realized his own hands were moving in the same way. John looked down at himself and realized he was touching something cold and hard but invisible. At that moment, the reflection of John in the black window grinned and yanked on the chain. John yelled as he lost his balance and he fell face down toward the grinning face. John screamed, but the scream was swallowed by the sound of a splash. John, Susan called. John, are you all right? Susan listened. Without thinking, she jumped off her Spirit Flyer and climbed quickly up the side of the trash bin. John was nowhere in sight. A strange black window-like object was lying on top of swirls of paper and other trash. John, where are you? Susan asked. She looked carefully around in the trash bin. John? The shiny surface of the black window quivered slightly like water. Susan climbed over the edge of the metal container and dropped down. The trash came to her knees. John, where are you? Susan asked. The black shiny panel moved again. Susan shuffled forward and looked down at it. She rubbed her eyes. Far away, deep inside the window, she thought she saw something move as if she were looking down into the deep water. As she strained to see, a face floated up toward Susan out of the darkness. She gasped when she recognized who it was. John, she called. Without thinking, she reached toward him. But just as she reached forward, she heard the same sound of a blowing horn that she had heard before. She cocked her head for a moment, trying to determine where the sound was coming from. She frowned and shrugged her shoulders. Then she reached out slowly and touched the surface of the black window. The instant she touched it, her hand was sucked in with a whoosh, and almost as fast her whole body had gone through. Everything went dark in the blink of an eye. All she heard was a blaring horn, a rattling chain, and a tiny splash. Susan barely had time to scream before she heard a sound like a cork popping out of a bottle. Suddenly there was daylight. She looked in front of her and gasped at what she saw. John was standing before her, about 15 feet away, but not only John. Another person that looked just like John was standing beside the first John. John, I'm seeing double, Susan said. She rubbed her eyes. When she opened them again, there were still two Johns. One John looked different, though. Somewhat pale and almost two-dimensional, more like a photograph or a ghost than the real person. The ghostly John seemed to be looking at the other John and pulling on something invisible. Two of me? You mean you see him? The solid John asked with a horrified expression on his face. Then the ghostly thin face of the other John looked at Susan and smiled. The real John opened his mouth to scream, "No!" As Susan rubbed her eyes, the ghostly thin John stuck his tongue out at Susan. Then he took a short step and faded right into the solid John. No, it can't be, John said, shaking his head with his eyes closed. Not again. I got away this time. It's okay. I only see one of you, Susan said. The boy stopped shaking his head and looked at his cousin. I'm normal, he asked. Yes, Susan said. Then she thought, I guess so. Susan looked around. She was in a long dugout hole. John had just come out of the same hole himself and was looking around when Susan appeared. What happened? Susan asked, looking up at John. The hole was almost waist deep. They were no longer in the alley, and there was no sign of the trash bin. She looked down. Her feet were standing on a shiny black object that looked exactly like the dark window in the trash bin. Only this time it seemed hard like glass. Since she didn't fall through it, as she stood on it. Since she didn't fall through it as she stood on it, Susan hopped off the odd window, then looked around once more. Garbage surrounded her in the distance like small mountains. That's when she noticed the awful smell. The hole she was standing in was about 15 feet wide and 20 feet long, and that hole was in a deeper dugout area that was about the size of a baseball diamond. She pulled herself out of the hole and dusted off her hands and the knees of her blue jeans. I felt as if I just got sucked in through a vacuum cleaner, Susan said. I thought I saw you inside that black window. When I reached out for you, I was sucked through. It seemed almost like water that wasn't wet. Yet it wasn't like air either. I didn't have time to think about it. I was here so fast, a swish and a pop, and here we are. But where are we? Don't you know anything? This is the Centerville Dump, John said. Roger and I come out here sometimes. Mr. Brick, the dump man, digs a new pit every so often, and they fill it up with garbage. When it's full, they cover the pit up with dirt. The Spirit Flyer was in a mound over there when I first saw it, but he's covered that whole area up. Susan turned around to see where John was looking. A whole section of the dump was covered with fresh, bare dirt with bulldozer tracks crisscrossing over it. Susan looked back at John. He was peeping down over the edge of the hole as if he were afraid to look into the black window. I wouldn't get too close to that if I were you, Susan said. It seemed like any ordinary hole, John said, except for that black window thing. You see it came right through? You didn't stop any place? It was like a flash or the blink of an eye, Susan said, frowning. She pulled her long brown hair out of her face. She looked down at her watch. I wasn't checking, but I don't think much time has passed. It all happened so fast. Oh, John said softly. Susan stared at him. He seemed dirty or different. His blue jeans and t-shirt were more messed up than her clothes. Did you come straight through, Susan said, or did it take longer? John didn't answer. He opened his hands and saw a dark gray powder on them. He started to say something, then stopped. What's that stuff? John asked. Ashes, John said, but a few seconds ago it was a... Susan watched him carefully. Then John rubbed his hands together to get rid of the ashes. Then he slapped his clothes, and small clouds of black, sooty smoke surrounded the boy. John looked at the dark puffs in surprise. When then he felt around his neck carefully for a moment. Where did you go, John? Susan asked. Did you go to the same place that you disappeared to before? Why do you keep bringing that up? John asked irritably. I didn't know any of this was going to happen. They said I could keep the toys. What toys? Susan asked. She stared at her cousin. His face was full of confusion. What are you talking about? I didn't have a chance, John moaned. I lost my balance because that chain. John suddenly stopped speaking and his mouth fell open. Susan stared at him. He didn't seem to notice her since he was looking back toward the hole in the pit. A look of terror crossed his face. Then without a word he turned and began to run. What chain? Susan asked, but John kept running. Susan looked back, yet didn't see what frightened the boy. She ran after him, calling his name. But John wouldn't stop running. He looked over his shoulder once, as if something or someone was chasing him. Though he seemed to be looking right at something, Susan was sure it wasn't her. He ran past the gate that led out and onto the old dump road and headed toward town. By the time Susan reached the dirt road, John was 100 yards ahead of her and still running as if a ghost was after him. Come on. In another part of the dump, an old woman from behind a mound of trash, watching the boy and girl as they ran away. She had a pleasant smile on her face. She was a small, tidy woman with her gray hair combed in a neat bun. A long black snake was coiled in her arms. The old woman stroked its shiny black back as if it were a kitten. The snake's head rose in the air and spread its hood like a cobra. On the throat of the snake was a curious marking. A white X in the center was inside a white circle. The snake watched the children also. It flicked out a blood-red tongue and hissed. Don't be too eager, the woman said. We must do this carefully this time, and completely. They said there'd be more of those bicycles. All it takes is time, though, just a little time and a few toys. The snake hissed again, the red eyes staring after the children. Like a flash of black lightning, it struck down and bit the woman's arm. Smoke curled up from its jaws and as the fangs held tight. The old woman jerked her arm, but more as reflex than out of pain. If you insist, the woman sneered, but remember, I'm only following orders. If you had done your job correctly in the first place, we wouldn't be on this assignment. Why the Bureau sticks me with an amateur like you is more than an insult. I'm thinking that's Mr. Grimsby. The snake released its hold on the old woman's arm. As the fangs retracted, a puff of smoke came up out of the two dark holes, but no blood. She flung the snake up into the air. The black body wiggled and waggled against the blue sky and kept going higher and higher. Then the wiggling began to look like flapping wings because that's what it was, the wings of a black crow. The crow flew up, then dove down, landing on the woman's outstretched arm. The trial run is complete, said the woman with a bored expression. This may be easier than we thought. But then I'm going strictly by the manual, as you should have done. It's all in the chapter titled Fear and Desire. You feed their greed and their fears, and you control the person. Elementary procedures, except for a hair bird brain like you. We'll have all the children eating ashes on the target day. You'll see. The 4th of July is on the way. And on Independence Day, when the fireworks start, I'll get signatures on the dotted line and in blood like the manual says. You just wait. The Bureau knows I get results. Then I'll get promoted back into a real job in one of the bigger cities. I'll have all the ashes I want and a host of fools to feed me. The crow croaked in a reedy small voice. What about the girl? We'll get to her, the old woman said confidently. Just like her cousin. Her bicycle has the instruments attached, but she seems ignorant of how to use them. Fortunately, we made a deal with the boy about the instruments. He can't wait to get the toys, but a little tug of the chain keeps him off balance. Did you see the little fool run? You have to keep their fear hot and sticky. Greed and fear are the best glue to repair a broken chain, but there are 1,000 other ways to keep the order of the change too. If you had read your manual, you would know that. But no, you had to botch an X removal plan and let the boy in with his bicycle, so they all escaped. Now we've got a bigger mess than the one you started with. That's why you're the bird brain and I'm at command. The girl will be a tough one to crack, but as long as we follow standard procedures, we'll fix her chain soon enough, and with her cooperation. But now go and follow them. The crow bobbed up and down obediently and then flew off into the sky. He circled over the dump and headed toward town. The old woman chuckled softly to herself as she watched the crow. Then she walked carefully through the mounds of trash down to the newly dug pit. She raised her arms, and the shiny black window floated up out of the hole. As she walked toward it, the black window moved to her. The woman stepped into the panel of darkness as if she were walking through a door. The blackness rippled like oil as it sucked her in without a sound, and then the window shrunk to a dot and was gone. Da. Okay. So, anybody on? One person. Zapped and kaboom. Nobody's saying, okay, good night. Hey there, buddy. How you doing? God bless. Your grandkids are all doing well. Hope you're close to them. Are they in another state? I asked you that before, but I didn't get an answer. Oh, whatever. Okay. Well, good night. God bless. I'm going to sign off here. My voice is kind of scratchy, like usual. Good night.